Welcome to The Car Flip Show. My name's Justin. I was a part-time flipper turned full-time used car dealer. This show is all about teaching you how to buy and sell cars for profit. Thanks so much for listening. Let's get into the episode. This is The Car Flip Show, episode number 9. Thanks so much for listening today. Whether you're walking on the treadmill, out for a run, or maybe you're driving into work, a lot of you have filled me in on when you listen, and I think that's really cool. It's awesome to be with you today whenever you're listening. If you're listening on the day it launched, or maybe it's 3 years down the road, it's really cool to be with you sharing this information today. I have 2 things in particular we're going to look at today, and generally there is a lesson type thing. We answer a question, or I look at a certain facet of car flipping, and then there's usually another section where we're talking about a tool or a resource. We've talked about things like the jump box that I use, the scanner that I use. We've even looked at, I think, at a website, car-part.com, and why that should be useful to you. Today, we're actually going to look at a resource that I've just launched at thecarflip.com. It's called the Car Flip Roadmap, so we're going to check that out. Actually, next week, we're going to look at a turkey baster and why you should have that in your toolbox. But we'll talk about that in next week's podcast. Then we're also going to look at the last 3 cars that I just flipped. So there's a Mercury Montego, a Ford Mustang, and a GMC Envoy. I'm going to share what I made on each of those and maybe how long I had them, just give you some backstory on those. So we'll look at the last 3 cars that I flipped, but we're going to start out with the car flip roadmap. First off, what is it? And this basically is a process. This is my car flipping process. This is exactly how I flip every single car that I do. It starts at a point, it goes around, and I say it goes around in a circle. Actually, the way that it's laid out is a rectangle, but it goes around the rectangle and it ends up in the same place. And you go around and around and around that as many times as you can. The more times you go around the roadmap, the more money that there is to be made, because that means you have bought a car, gone through the process, and sold it. I've had a lot of people ask, I see what you're doing. I see you on YouTube. I've watched as you've bought a car, and then I see a couple weeks later when you sold it, and then maybe sometimes someone sees a car come in and it's there for months, and they're thinking, okay, what is the process? How did you find that car? What did it take to get it from where it was to eventually having it ready to go and then selling it? How did you market it? Now, this is going to be an overview. This is going to be my process. I think the video is like 23 minutes, so it's as much as I can cram into that 23 minutes that I can, but it's my exact process. It's like if you were to go on a trip. I went to Nashville recently, and I had to pull out my phone, pull out Google Maps, and let Google Maps take me there, because I have been a couple times, but I couldn't remember exactly how to get there. That's kind of what this is. It's like, I am interested in flipping. I've never done it before, but I think I can. Like, I'm pretty sure that I have the skills. I just don't know how to get started. This is to take you from where you are, to show you the process so you can fill in the blank with what you need to do to get to where you want to be. So check that out. It's really easy to get to if you go to thecarflip.com/roadmap. It's going to take you right to it. You can get instant access right there. If you are actually a member of the email list, you probably have it in your inbox. If you've not seen it, make sure you check your spam folder. Gmail likes to sort things out, so you might have missed it, but that is available at thecarflip.com/roadmap, and we'll put a link for that in the show notes so you can go later and listen or check that out after you listen. So that's the resource for the week, the Car Flip Roadmap, absolutely free. I'd love for you to check it out. Maybe let me know what you think about that. Now, let's get on to the last 3 cars that I flipped. The first of those 3 is a 2006 Mercury Montego. This is a car that I actually had a little bit longer than I anticipated. I bought this car kind of in the tax season rush. So when I was at an auction when I bought this. This is the only one of these 3 that I actually bought at auction. But prices were up a little bit. This one went through and went in the range that I needed it to be in. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. You can actually go to YouTube and watch me bid and buy this vehicle live. I was at the auction. I thought, why not pull out my phone? Did a YouTube live, and you can see me pay $1,400 for this at the auction. It had 152,000 miles. There was a buyer's fee of right at about $100, which puts me at $1,500 invested. I got it back to the dealership. Everything mechanically was good. Tires were good. The interior was all right. I vacuumed it out. There was a little scuff on the front bumper that I had to take some brake cleaner, which works a lot like paint thinner. Sprayed it on my paper towel, wiped off the scuff on the front right part of the bumper, and it was good to go. The only mechanical issue that we had was a slightly soft brake pedal, and through some research, and actually we had a customer car that came in a week before we brought this on the lift. They had a soft brake pedal, ended up being brake pads, which is kind of weird for a soft brake pedal to relate to brake pads. Turns out they were glazed, and they were also a little low, so Whatever the case, we put brake pads on it. The brake pedal was fine, so we put it out on the front line, and then honestly, it was a little bit crickets. It was tax time. I really expected it to sell pretty quickly. We had it priced at $39.50. Again, I had $1,500, and I guess I had, for the brake pads, we pay, I want to think it's $23 or so for brake pads, so I had $23 in pads. It sat out for a little while. A guy eventually came in. He at one time had a Ford 500. He knew that they were pretty good cars. He even knew to check to make sure it didn't have the CVT transmissions. Some of them did. You want to stay away from the CVTs in the Fords because, honestly, they were junk. So he found out, okay, it's not a CVT. It's pretty clean. We negotiated on the price. I got down to $3,500. I have $1,500 plus my brake pads. So my profit on this one was $2,000, I guess minus my brake pads, which were $23. So almost $2,000 profit on this one. It was a good day. $2,000 day. I'll take that any day. I would have preferred not to have had it the 3 or 4 months that I did, but for $2,000, I'll take that. So that's the Mercury Montego. The 2008 Ford Mustang, this is actually the one that I made the most on out of these three, and it was kind of a unique story. This is one that actually started out with a 1986 a 1986 Pontiac Fiero. This is a car that a friend of mine had. He and his son had restored it. Honestly, they had put way too much money into it. They had put a new interior. They'd had the car painted. He actually had the engine completely rebuilt, pulled out, rebuilt. They had over $10,000 in a 1986 Pontiac Fiero, which is just not something that you want to do. At the end of the day, the son had it in his name. He didn't want anything to do with it. He kind of did it with his dad as a project. He let his dad have the car, except he kept it in his name. So every year he's paying insurance, he's paying property tax, and his dad's not even driving. It's just sitting outside. And it had been sitting so long, it wasn't running the best. So he told his dad, all right, Dad, we probably need to get rid of this car. His dad called me and said, I've got this Fiero. You want to come take a look at it? And I really wasn't interested in the Fiero. It looked nice. It was pretty neat. It was red, had a really cool gray leather interior with red inset with the Fiero emblems. It was neat, but it wasn't something that I wanted to make an offer on because honestly, I just didn't want to insult him because I knew they had over $10,000 invested in the car. I went over and looked at it, and his name's, I call him Mr. Fred. I said, Mr. Fred, I really don't want to insult you. Honestly, I would prefer not to make an offer because if I were to buy a car like this, I really wouldn't want to have any more than $500 invested because if you go on Craigslist or you go on Facebook Marketplace, you're going to see these cars all over the place for $1,200, for $1,700, for maybe $3,000, but those are usually in pretty good shape. His was in good shape, but it needed a few things. It just didn't. It wasn't a $10,000 car, and he knew that. He wasn't expecting to get $10,000, and he didn't have anything invested. So that's the way I left it. He called me a couple of days later, and he said, Justin, he said, if you want it for $500, come get it. And honestly, I wasn't excited to get it, but I told him I would do it, so I said, okay, I'll come grab it. I actually went to get it. When I went to get the car, it actually broke down halfway to my dealership. I had to pull over on the side of the road. Actually, there was 2 homeless people walking by. I didn't realize they were homeless at the time, but I thought they had stopped their car and came out to help me. But as they helped me push it off the road, I jumped in my wife's car who was following me, and she said, those people actually didn't have a car. They were just walking on the side of the road, right? And as I saw them walking away, they looked a little rough. I'm just assuming they were homeless, but long story short, some homeless people had to help me push my Pontiac Fiero off the road. So I finally get it back to the dealership, clean it up. Actually, all it was a bad battery and it was probably a bad alternator that started the problem, but it had caused the battery to go bad. So we put an alternator on it. We put a new battery in it, and actually ran and drove pretty good. So I had $500 that I invested in it. I spent probably, I'm going to say 50 to 100 bucks. Let's see, probably 100 bucks. I paid $35 for my batteries from Interstate. That's a refurbished battery. The alternator, I think, was $35 or $45. I bought that from car-part.com. That was pretty cheap. And then I had the labor to install those, which my mechanic's on staff. So it wasn't too bad from a labor standpoint. So I have maybe $650 in this Fiero. I put it on the front line, and nothing. It's kind of like the Montego. No one's really looking for a Pontiac Fiero, and everyone that did was a young kid that would come in. They didn't have any money. I had it, I think, at first listed for $39.50. Then I lowered it to $29.50, and still wasn't getting too much. I had a few people that came by. They had one back in the day. You know, back in the 80s, this was kind of the car to have for a little bit. My dad's told me about the Fieros, and they were just, it was a neat car in that time period, and there's a little nostalgia behind them. There are a few online communities around that particular car, but no one was interested. And then one day, this guy pulls up in a 2008 Ford Mustang, and he said, would you be interested in a trade potentially? And I said, what do you have? Is the Mustang there? And he said, yeah, this is my son's car. He was pretty straight up. He said, my son actually drifted this car. I don't know why you would use a 2008 Mustang 6-cylinder to drift, but it had 20-inch chrome wheels. It was lowered. It looked good from a distance, but when I walked up on it, the front bumper was kind of hanging off a little bit. It was faded. The back bumper wasn't hanging off, but it was faded. They had rolled the wheel wells to give them room to fit the 20s on there with it being lowered, so that it was kind of crinkly around the wheels. The interior was nasty, disgusting. It was missing the center console. And so I said, well, let's take this up the road, then you can drive mine, and we'll see what we can do. So I drove his. Actually drove pretty good. Wasn't bad. The emergency brake didn't work. Had a check engine light. But other than that, it was pretty sound. So we got back. He drove mine. He said, this one isn't perfect, but I know mine isn't perfect. He said, would you be interested in an even swap? And I hadn't even looked at the mileage. I don't know why I didn't look at the mileage on his as I was driving it, but I was thinking, okay, I probably should have checked that. This probably has 200,000 miles. The car only had 130,000 miles on it, so I looked up what those were selling for. They were selling for anywhere from $6,000 to $7,000. I knew mine on its best day might bring $3,000. So I said, sure, yeah, why don't we do that? We'll go inside and work this deal. I wrote him up the bill of sale and all the paperwork. He was happy. I was happy. But then we just parked it because it needed several things. It needed the front and rear bumper painted. It needed the wheel wells fixed. On the wheel wells, I ended up buying this trim type material off of eBay, and actually was able to double-side tape with adhesive that on the wheel wells. Used a heat gun to stretch it out. It actually covered up the imperfection. It actually looked kind of neat. So that took care of that. I didn't have those painted. I had the front and rear bumper painted. I want to think that was $300 to have. It might have been $400 to have those two bumpers painted. I bought a center console. We fixed the emergency brake on it. It was actually a cable that was missing, so we replaced that. At the end of the day, I want to think my total investment was around $500 that I put into it. So I had to buy the emergency brake cable. I had to have the front and rear bumper painted. It might have been closer to $600 now that I'm thinking about it, but it wasn't a huge investment. And being I only had the $700 in the Fiero, my investment in that was somewhere around $1,300. But just for safe numbers, I'm going to say $1,500. That way, I'm not undershooting it. So I have $1,500 in this once it's ready to go. I put it online for $59.50, just seeing what would happen. For a 2008 with those miles, that actually was one of the better priced ones, but I understood that mine wasn't perfect. It had been lowered. It had the wheels. Maybe somebody would like them. Maybe they wouldn't, but it was a pretty competitive price. I had a ton of interest. I had a ton of people come by. A few people drove it and were kind of like, they didn't like the way it drove, being lowered. A few people didn't like the wheels. Turned out one of the wheels was actually bent a little bit. I didn't realize that, but it didn't cause any issues driving, but you could see it if the sun hit it the right way. So finally, I had a girl, and she called, and she said, hey, I want to come take a look at the Mustang. Do you still have it? I said, yeah. She came by that afternoon, drove it. She said, I'm going to go check with my bank. She said, could you write me up a bill of sale? I think that's what they'll need. So I wrote her up a bill of sale. She calls me the next day and says, okay, I got the check. I want to come pick it up. And I was like, are we going to talk? I didn't say it, but I'm thinking, is she going to talk about price, or does she want to negotiate? And she comes in with a check for the full amount plus tax tag and title. She paid $59.50, exactly what I was asking. I actually had a guy that was willing to pay $5,000 that I probably would have taken. He actually came the same day. She called me and said, hey, I'm on the way. Or she didn't say I'm on the way. She said, I'm on my way to the bank to pick up the check. And she said, I'll be there at like 3 o'clock or something. I had a guy that came in that morning, like literally had $5,000 cash on him. And I had to take the gamble to decline his $5,000, which the day before I would have gladly taken. And he actually came back later and said, hey, would you do 55? And I said, man, she's on her way with the check. I had to trust that she actually was. She got there. She was as happy as she could be. She loved the wheels. She loved the way that it was lowered. It had the racing stripes down it. Again, it was only a 6-cylinder. It looked like a GT, but it definitely wasn't. But she was as happy as she could be. I obviously was very satisfied that I made an extra $1,000, because if the guy came the day before, I would have been happy to give it to him for $5. Because she called, luckily she did, I knew that I needed to wait and not sell it for the $5. So that put my total investment at $1,500 in this car. I sold it. I'm going to use $6,000 just because it's a good round number. That means I made a total profit on this one of $4,500. That actually seemed like a higher number. $4,500 because I was able to buy the Fiero cheap, was able to work out a trade, and I can't actually give myself a ton of the credit on this. Like, I couldn't arrange someone calling to offer me a Pontiac Fiero. That's not something you can plan, or you can't have the skill to do that. But you can't even have the skill to have someone call you and say, hey, I want to trade you a 2008 Ford Mustang. And then you can't really even have the skill to have someone call you and say, hey, I want to pay full price for your Mustang. Sometimes these things just happen. You know, I made $4,500 on this, but I can't necessarily chalk that up to being because I'm so smart or because I know what I'm doing all the time, because sometimes you don't. Sometimes good things just happen to the people that put themselves in the position for those things to happen. So because I'm flipping cars, because I'm doing what I'm doing, sometimes things like this just happen to work out. And that's the fun thing about car flipping. Sometimes you will make the $4,500 profit, and sometimes you'll have a car you only make $300 on. It's going to happen, but you got to take the good with the bad, and you got to be, equally as accepting of both. But that was the big win out of these three. The next was a 2004 GMC Envoy. Now, this is actually a vehicle that I got on trade. A guy bought a 2006 Mercury Mountaineer from me. In the deal, the amount of cash that he put up actually paid for my vehicle. The $2,000 that I allowed him on the Envoy was actually my profit. So when I sold the Envoy, that was going to be my profit on the previous deal. I put it out for $39.50 for a vehicle in that price range. It was a pretty nice buy. I mean, it looked nice. It was clean. It drove well. A girl came in, actually another person that had lined up financing. She went to her bank actually to get the check, and it didn't work out. Actually, the deal fell apart, and I thought the deal wasn't going to work out. They actually rode the bus up here to see me. I'm right outside of downtown Raleigh, so there's a bus stop right across the street. She came in on the bus. Things fell apart. She was bummed. I was bummed. But I have another bank up the road, and I said, before we give up on this, and honestly, she couldn't go anywhere. Anyway, I said, why don't we take a credit app, get some information from you. I'm going to send your info over to a lender that I've dealt with. Let's see what they can do. I sent everything over. They called me in about 30 minutes and said, hey, we can do this. No problem at all. They financed the tax tag, everything for her. So financed the full amount. She was good to go. I was obviously good to go because when the guy brought it in, it didn't need anything. Like, we brought it in, vacuumed it out, put it on the front line. It was good to go. So made I guess it'd be technically $19.50 on this one because there's no buyer fee, which is a plus to buying from individuals. You don't have to deal with the auctions buy fees. So I made $1,950 on the GMC Envoy. I didn't have the foresight to add all of this up, but I'm going to try to do it off the top of my head. It looks like out of these three cars, I made $8,500. Now, the Mustang was kind of a special circumstance. It just happened to work out. But between these three, making $8,500, that definitely is worth the time and investment that I put into it. And for you, you might be thinking, man, that sounds like a pretty nice income for only selling three vehicles. Now, it did take a while on the Montego and the Mustang because I did have to do a little more to the Mustang. The Montego just sat because someone just took the right person to come and look at it. But when you begin flipping, I just want to preface it by saying you might not make $8,500 on the first three cars that you flip. But as you continue to learn, as you continue to hone your craft and learn the ins and outs of car flipping, these things become more possible. Checking out the car flip roadmap would give you an idea of kind of how that all works together and kind of connect the dots on where you start and then how you kind of get to the end and end up actually selling the vehicle. So check that out. Let me know what you think about the car flip roadmap. I will see you in episode 10 where we're going to be talking about the turkey baster. Until next week, have a good one.